Hello, everyone. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Pluto return. So, what's the Pluto return and what's it all about? The Pluto return occurs when Pluto returns to the natal position where Pluto lives in the natal chart. And unfortunately, you and I will never get to see our Pluto return because the Pluto return occurs every 248 years. So unless, we get to ascend into 5D within our body, no, I'm just kidding. Or unless you're a vampire, or unless you have some kind of special powers, no, you and I are not going to get to experience our Pluto return, sadly. But other entities do get to experience a Pluto return. One of the most popular kinds of charts that we can look at to study Pluto returns are those of countries. So I want to share with you this book right here. It's called The Book of World Horoscopes by Nicholas Campion. And this book is a total gem. It is filled with the birth charts of various countries. I think he tries to get like all of them pretty much. So the interesting thing about this book, though, is that there's actually very few countries that have experienced their Pluto returns. So a few of them which are going to be England, Russia, Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States is actually coming up on our very first Pluto return right now. Yeah, the exact Pluto return for the United States is happening in 2022, although look around, we're definitely experiencing it. So the interesting thing about Pluto returns, right? So Pluto has to do with death and rebirth. It's a total regeneration, and what it primarily has to do with is power. So interestingly, we see huge grabs for power on Pluto returns. And we have to, it's a reckoning. It's a reckoning of what is this entity, this nation. Nations tend to be pretty powerful. What is their relationship with power? Is it power to the people? Is it power to the nuclear weapons? Is it power to the dictatorship? What does power look like? So this is like a huge kind of reconciliation that happens during a Pluto return. I've been watching the Pluto return of the United States fairly closely now for a few years. And I am really interested in phases. So in astrology, there's always phases. We can take that new moon cycle of like new moon, first quarter, full moon, closing, and then there's this last phase called the balsamic phase. And I feel like that phase has been really critical in watching and living through this Pluto return for the United States. So that last phase is like the final it's the final breakdown, basically. And our Pluto return here in the United States, we entered that balsamic phase in the 80s. So this was around the time of like Reaganomics and giving more power to the corporations. So here in the United States, we're experiencing a lot of it with financial. We're seeing a lot of like the power dynamic play out with like equality and justice for all. We're taking a look at our Constitution and wondering like, does this really apply to everyone? Like these founding ideals, they don't apply to everyone. So what are we going to do about it? So that's why we're experiencing a lot of the movements that we are right now, namely the Black Lives Matter movement and resistance against like the police and like what role do the police play in this country? Because, we look back at the beginning of the revolution, when the colonists were pushing back against like taxation, like we don't want taxation without representation. And so us now, one whole Pluto cycle later, taxes are still a very important topic. I'm looking at one of England's Pluto returns. So England is one of those countries that has had multiple Pluto returns. For England, we tend to look at the chart of the Battle of Hastings. That would be year 1066. And that is when like William the Conqueror was crowned King of England. So 1066, that's the chart that, according to Campion, astrologers prefer to use. So I went ahead and I calculated those Pluto returns for England. I found some really interesting things. I'm planning to write an article on Pluto returns detailing some of the more nerdier data that I'm uncovering. But interestingly, the very first income tax was put in place from England during their Pluto return in the 1800s, like early 1800s, like we're talking like 1800, 1801, 1802, smack dab exact Pluto return. So this theme of taxes and money and wealth and who's collecting that wealth and who's amounting to it, who's benefiting from it and keeping people in poverty kind of thing. Like we see this going on right now where billionaires aren't paying taxes and they're doing this like space race thing where many of us are struggling to make ends meet and struggling to pay for like medical treatment and things like that. So wealth certainly plays a role with Pluto because money is power in so many different ways. I mean, it's not all there is to power, right? Like we can have confidence, we can strut our stuff, and we can have personal authority. We can totally have that no matter what financial status that we're in. However, money is influence. And when you have a lot of money, you can influence larger entities like governments and politics, and once you have enough, you can even go beyond that. So money does have everything to do with power. So we're going to be seeing a lot of these financial themes. That's why we're talking about reparations. That's why we're talking about tax the rich. That's why all of these themes are coming up around the Pluto return. We're seeing a total breakdown of the system. Another interesting thing is status symbols. So statues. We have seen the statues crumble here in the United States, and it reverberated elsewhere into the world. In some of my research, I found the term iconoclast. That term was coined, I want to say during 1555. Yeah, 1555, during one of England's second, or one of their other Pluto returns. And iconoclasm is basically the destruction of statues, icons, images, or monuments for religious or political reasons. And this was actually encouraged during this time. I think Parliament passed some kind of act or bill that encouraged it. So it was like, yeah, let the old gods or the old icons fall. And that's very much a Plutonian thing. And we've been experiencing that as these old Confederate statues who no one would remember these people anyway are being painted rainbow and tagged with Black Lives Matter and everything like that. And so this is a taking back, a reclaiming of icons. I think that icon, the term icon, totally carries with it influence and power. It's very Plutonian. And to kind of usurp the old order and kind of take over with a new one, it is indeed very Plutonian. So this is happening right now. We are living through a Pluto return here in the United States, which is why life is so damn stressful. We're literally going through a political death and rebirth, and we're all playing a part in this process. We're all bearing witness to it and participating, and that's why it is so freaking stressful. As I was mentioning, a lot of countries don't even come to see their Pluto return because borders are redrawn and political powers are shifting and borders are being shifted and things like that. Also, on that note, we can't have a chart for every land. We can't have a chart for every country. For example, there are a ton of countries that we don't have original charts for. And we could get into this whole digression around colonialism and who says that this is the start of this land, right? So we do have to take those kinds of things into consideration. There are some countries and some nations that we don't have an original chart for. So the next best thing is taking a significant moment in history. For example, so I'm just going to flip to any given chart here. So here we have Zimbabwe, and the earliest chart that is listed in this book is 1965. We know that this nation, this land, existed before 1965, but with no recorded date of when this nation became, we have nothing to go off of. So then this this book is actually really cool because Campion will cite, the reasoning for this chart, like what happened. So there's a whole story and research that goes into these charts. So for a lot of the charts in this book, it's fascinating because many of them were established within the last 200 years and thus have not experienced Pluto return, because Pluto return is every 248 years. So many of these countries have not. But what I find fascinating is, and this is a little bit of a digression, but we have this bigger cycle, this Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It's an 800-year cycle. Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin within the same element for 200 years. So for the last 200 years, they were only making conjunctions every 20 years in the sign of Earth. And so the Earth element kind of dominated our collective focus. It was all about land. It was all about hoarding. It was all about saving and accumulation and land, and like discovering land and saying this is mine and this is my territory, and purchasing of large territories, discovering of land and things like that. So acquisition of territory was like a huge theme for the last 200 years on this planet. And so I think it has a lot to do with that, actually, that a lot of the boundaries of nations were reestablished within the last 200 years or so. So I think that is very much reflective of that. That said, we are now in an air element. So that's another big, huge change that we're living through. If you're curious to learn a little bit more about this shift into the element of air, I do have a lecture available on my website. It's on sale right now for $5. And it's on Saturn and Aquarius. Yep, Saturn is in Aquarius right now, but I do go into the major shift into the air element. So you may want to check that out. But yeah, it's fascinating though, because one of my teachers, Lee Lehman, amazing astrologer, Dr. Lee Lehman. She's amazing, horary, medical astrologer, just all around fantastic. And she was describing that these shifts between the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, between elements, is always very stressful on the generations. And this is why you see like disagreements and like battles between generations. And I think that all of us millennials can relate that like our mothers are trying to give us a 12-person dining set and we have nowhere to put it because we still live in like tiny apartments, etc. And so it's like this idea of like our parents like hoarding on and like saving all these mementos and stuff like that. Like, shoot, my mom goes to the thrift store to like rescue things. I don't know why. And then tries to give it to us. Like, she can't come over empty-handed, which is nice, but it's like, we don't want stuff. Like, our generation doesn't want stuff. And it's because if you were born after 1980, when we experienced the Jupiter-Saturn mutation, when they conjoined in Libra in 1980, they went back to Earth in the year 2000. And then now they have just recently conjoined in Aquarius. And Jupiter-Saturn will conjoin in the air element for the rest of our lives, for the next 200 years, which is why we're also seeing a shift toward everything digital currencies, uploading photos onto a hard drive versus like printing them out and having them. So we're trying to be like lighter, we're trying to share things. So I think that shift really also coincides with this next Pluto return, and the whole idea of wealth and currency and materialism, because that's a huge problem. And I know that other transits can talk about that as well. But, this idea of consumerism and materialism, it's going to kill us. It's going to kill us. So I think that could have something to do with the whole idea of like greed and the economy and capitalism and finances being a huge part of this Pluto return. So this is a lot of information. I may do a longer video on this stuff in time if you all are interested, but I think that's a good stopping point for right now. I did also briefly want to mention that, while we won't have a Pluto return, and while most of us may not have a Pluto opposition, the orbit of Pluto is erratic. There are some people alive right now in their 80s and 90s who are well within their transit of their Pluto opposition. That's because Pluto's been moving very fast for the last, it's been gaining in speed since basically the sign of like Leo. It's been spending less and less time in each sign. From here on out in our lifetimes, Pluto is going to increasingly spend more and more time in each sign. So when Pluto enters Aquarius, it's going to spend 20 years in Aquarius. When I was born, Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto only spent 12 years in Scorpio. So it's been increasing the time that it spends in each sign. So yeah, you and I will not see our Pluto opposition. It's rare. Only certain generations can experience that, which might be something interesting to think about in terms of our grandparents and the kind of life that they led and what it means for that generation, the Pluto and Cancer generation, to experience a Pluto return. So really interesting to think about. I'm still meditating on it myself. But you and I will experience our Pluto square Pluto. And that is a transit that has a lot to do with radical self-acceptance. We will all experience that transit in our late 30s to mid 40s, depending on how old you are, what generation you're in. And that is a reckoning because Pluto has a lot to do with control, what's within our control and what is not. And so that is either the point in time where you say, I'm finally going to get a control on this thing that I have like bitched about and been unhappy about my whole life. I'm finally going to do it. Or I'm finally just going to accept that I'm not. And so it's one of those points in life where it's like, I'm getting too old for this shit. Like I'm either just going to accept it or I'm going to do something about it and move the fuck on. So that's Pluto. That's Pluto energy. So yeah, what we can experience right now too, I think with the United States and the Pluto return is like, are we the best? Are we the world power? Are we the world superpower still? It's like, in many ways, I don't think we are. And that's a part of the reckoning with the Pluto return. So give me some of your thoughts. I'd love to hear in the comments, how are you seeing this Pluto return show up? And what are you noticing and what are you feeling about this next cycle? So I guess I should also mention, our Pluto return is happening at 27 degrees Capricorn and 32 minutes. And we'll actually have 3 exact returns. That's going to be on February 20th, 2022. It's going to retrograde. It's going to be July 11th, 2022. And then finally, on December 28th, 2022. So those are the exact Pluto return dates, but we're already feeling it. We're already witnessing the breakdown and the struggle to maintain and reestablish the national footing in terms of what power looks like. And I think, things are pretty divided right now. And there is like a definite grab for power and what this next cycle is going to look like. Luckily, this cycle is welcome to evolve and change over the next 248 years. That's part of the deal. But this reseeding is very, very important juncture. So that's a little bit about the Pluto return. Let me know if you guys want to learn more. And till next time.